First Corinthians, as you know, is a letter. Not a book, not a theology essay. In fact, in Paul's day, it was not called First Corinthians. It was called, hey guys, Stephanos is in town. He brought a letter from Paul. Let's go over to Chloe's house and read Paul's letter, right? And Paul ends his letter to the Corinthians, written right around the middle of the first century in kind of Greece area. He's over in a city called Ephesus, a few hundred miles away. And he ends his letter to the Corinthians with what I call shotguns and salutations. Meaning he fires off like random spasmodic thoughts about God and life, and he answers a few last-minute questions. He wraps up a few problems in the church. He circles back to stuff he said early on in the letter and repeats himself. He lays out his itinerary, travel plans, and when he's done, he says goodbye. And on one level, chapter 16 is random, like all over the map. Don't you like theme people like me? No theme today, right? But when you kind of get down on your hands and knees and get into the text, it turns out it's not all that random. Paul is sharp as a tack, and when he writes, he knows how to make every sentence count in shaping the life of the church. And chapter 16 is really about what kind of shape the church should take in Corinth in the first century and in places like Portland today. And that said, let's kind of get into the text and think about what God is up to in Corinth, what God is up to in Portland, parallels, and how we live out the story of God today. Chapter 16, verse 1. Now, about the collection for God's people. Okay, what collection? What is Paul talking about? We don't get any backstory here, but when you step back and you look at the New Testament as a whole, and you go read Acts, you go read Romans, you go read 2 Corinthians, you figure out right around the time Paul is writing 1 Corinthians, there's a famine down in the city of Jerusalem, and the church, way hundreds of miles away, back in Jerusalem, is suffering. Right? Jesus followers are in dire straits, hungry, starving. Jews who don't love and follow Jesus as the Messiah are coming down hard on the Jesus, the Messiah movement. And the Jesus followers in Jerusalem are suffering. And Paul, who's hundreds of miles away in the empire planting churches, he sees an opportunity for the Gentile churches to give back to the Jewish church. Because remember, the gospel kind of blows up and spreads from Jerusalem in a few short years all over the known world, hundreds of miles with no technology. I mean, nothing like today. The gospel spreads by the mouths of people, in particular by the mouths of Jews. And really the Gentile churches are in debt back to really the Jews in Jerusalem. And Paul sees an opportunity for the Gentiles to give, not only because, hey, we have extra stuff and we live in Corinth and make lots of money and people in Jerusalem are poor, but because it's a way to kind of say we're in a symbiotic relationship, Jews, Gentiles, Romans, Greeks, all together in one story of God. Now, Paul, we pick up from Romans 15 and other places, is going around to the churches he planted, not only Corinth, but all over Galatia, he gets into in a minute, and Rome, and Ephesus, and Philippi, and he's raising money for the poor back in Jerusalem. And he gets into that. Look what he says. Do what I told the Galatian churches to do. On the first day of every week, which in Paul's day was Sunday, kind of Monday in today's schedule or rhythm, but the early church in kind of the early few hundred years gathered on Sunday nights because Sunday was a work day in the Roman Empire, which is why we all know Sunday nights is where Jesus is at. Am I right? In fact, we're adding a second Sunday night gathering at the end of September because Jesus is going to be here twice on a Sunday night. Mark your calendars, I think 5:30 and 7:30, but you are right in line. Sleep in on a Sunday morning, go to church at night. You are straight up biblical, right? On the first day, Sunday night, when you come together for worship of every week, each one of you, how many of you? Each one, right? Like not only, remember, he's raising money. Not, hey, if you're wealthy. Hey, if you live in Lake O or the West Hills, right? But each one of you, dirt poor, in college broke, which is like underneath broke, right? Because you're broke with your mom's like money, right? Like all, who said yeah? It's a good thing your mom's not here. On the first day of the week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money, no idea how much, in keeping with your income. We will come back to that. Saving it up so that when I come to town, no collections will have to be made, right? No fundraisers, no art shows or gimmicks or thermometer on the wall, the money is ready, right? And then when I arrive, I will give letters of introduction to the men you approve. Men who are trustworthy, who are safe with money. Paul says, make sure your money, God's money, is in the hands of people who are trustworthy. We are all about that here. There are godly, trustworthy guys who take the offering, guys, plural, the offering back and count the money and put it in a safe and go to the bank. And we go through an audit every year and all above bar, all of that. And he says, into trustworthy hands, and send them with your gift money to Jerusalem. And if it seems advisable for me to go also, they will accompany me. Paul is putting together a cohort of guys from Corinth and Philippi and Ephesus and Rome, all Galatia, all over, with money from various churches. Remember, no way to transfer money in Paul's day. Money, back in the day when money was real, novel concept, not from a laser printer, but from gold, right? No way to transfer money, and it was really dangerous. Robbers all over the roads, and you transfer money in groups of dudes who travel together in a band, in a cohort, and Paul is putting together guys from all sorts of churches to go back to Jerusalem and give money to God's people in need. Now, before we move on, chapter 16 is not an in-depth theology of money like you get in the teachings of Jesus, who, by the way, talks about money more than all of the other biblical authors put together, or like what you get in 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9. Go read that on your own time. But in one paragraph, one snippet, we get to Paul exposes two church myths that I hear all the time and replaces the two church myths about money with two biblical truths. If you're taking notes, here are the two myths. Myth one, the New Testament clearly teaches that you need to tithe 10% to your local church. Myth two, if you give money to God, he will give money back to you. Now, in place of, anybody hear stuff like that from time to time, right? In place of the church myths, here's what Paul says, here's what the scriptures actually teach. In place of the idea, give 10% to your local church, nothing wrong with that, okay. I'm a pastor, I'm all for that, but I'm biased, right? But in place of that, the New Testament's clear, overarching scripture is really clear. Everything you have is God's. It's way more way more ambitious. Everything you have is God's. Every dollar, every penny, every drop of water. You live in God's world, under God's roof, eat God's food, drink God's water, breathe God's oxygen. It's all grace. It's all gift. It's not yours. Yeah, but I work, but who gave you breath in your lungs? And when people say, well, God owns, 10% belongs to God. No, 100% belongs to God, which is why Jesus calls you and me stewards, which is a first century word meaning, in today's language, money managers, right? The money in your hands or whatever resources in your life belong to God, not to you, not to me, not to the church. And you are God's steward, God's money manager. He wants you to take the money and push the money into the redemptive story of God in the world. The problem with the tithe idea, and if you're new to the church, tithe is a kind of Hebrew word meaning 10%. The problem with the idea of giving 10% is, first, for the poor, it's way too much. Some of you are here and you're dirt poor, you're out of work, you're no job right now, or you're a dad and you're young and you're scraping to take care of your wife and your 3 kids and you're barely making ends meet. And the pastor who drives the BMW, I do drive a BMW, but it's 35 years old, so don't worry, don't worry. And it breaks down and it looks cool, but don't buy one. And when the dude stows up and asks for your money and makes you feel guilty, the guilt and the shame and I have people come up to me, I don't know, and I'm out of work, and how am I going to give? And all sorts of guilt and shame. No, take that off your shoulders. For the poor, it's way too much. But the main problem is that most of you are not poor. Well, yeah, I'm in college. And there's an iPhone in the back pocket of your $200 jeans, right? You're really poor, right? They're $50 Tom's slippers that are for charity, right? Good for you, right? Like, the majority of us are middle class or upper middle class or well off. And the problem with tithing is it's not really enough. Like, I love what Paul says. Look what he gets at. He says, in his own words, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income. Meaning the idea is the more you have, the more you give. Not the more you have, the more you put away or you blow on, but the more you have, the more you give, because God in Jesus is generous. You need to get that. Well, yeah, how was Jesus generous? He was poor and homeless, and he gives his body and his blood. Remember that when you go to the tables tonight. Jesus gives his body and his blood. God in Jesus is generous, and we're followers of Jesus. And to follow Jesus means to carry on Jesus' way in the world and to step and mature and grow into generosity. And when we bump into people who are in need, here, close by, or around the world, to give out of the way God blesses. Now that leads me to kind of the second myth, which is the idea that, if you give money to God, he will give money back to you, right? And you get that, you get the story of the dude who like puts $50 in the offering, and that week like a check comes in the mail for $500, right? And he freaks out. And the next week he puts in like $100, right? And waits by the mailbox every day, right? And you get story after story, and if you're not careful, God becomes an ATM or a slot machine, and you think you can manipulate God or strong arm or twist and turn, and you can't. That is a cheap parody of what the Bible actually teaches, which is, if you're taking notes, that you are blessed in order to be a blessing. Like, think back to one of the archetype stories, Genesis 12, which is all about when God calls Abraham and he forms Israel, right? And God says, I will bless you, and in turn, you will be a what? Blessing. That's how God's economy works. He blesses you with stuff, with money, with talent, with resources, with you fill in the blank. But it's not only because God loves you. He does. It's not only because he wants to hook you up, maybe, but it's because you are a conduit. You have a part to play in God's ongoing story of redemption. God is saving the world, and you're not on the sidelines. You are in that story. And every dollar, every penny, every hour, every day, every talent, every you fill in the blank, it is what God put in your life to pass on, to join in the story of God. That's how it works. And the reason you put $50 in the offering and you get a check, and I hear stories like that all the time. It's not because, hey, you can manipulate God. It's because God sees, okay, wow, here's somebody who doesn't worship money like the majority of Americans. Here's somebody who's open with his fists. Here's somebody who's generous. Here's somebody who's like Jesus. Here's somebody who's like Abraham and enjoys life, but passes. And God says, okay, I can give you more. I can give you more. I can give you more for you to steward, for you to money manage, for you to pass the blessing on. What are you saying? I'm saying, live like Abraham. Enjoy your flocks, enjoy your herds, enjoy your food, enjoy your drink. Don't feel guilty, right? But remember, you are blessed in order to pass the blessing on. Maybe that looks like 10%. Maybe that looks like 99%. There's a guy here who his life goal is to make enough money to live on 1% of his income. I don't know. If he gets halfway there, well done, my friend, right? I mean, your goal is to not simply obey. And the problem with rules, like, hey, give 10%, is it's easy to either disobey the rules and feel guilty, or obey the rules and miss the point, right? You can obey the rules and you can miss the point at the exact same time. The point is not rules here, percentage, budget. Nothing wrong with that. I give 10% to my local church as a starting point. I think it's a fabulous. I'm going to teach my boys to give 10% to the local church, not because the Bible clearly teaches, but because it's wisdom. It's a good place to start, and out of that, grow into the generous lifestyle God wants for all of you. But don't miss the point. God blesses you to pass the blessing on. Now, All of that in a few verses. Back to the story. Paul moves on. Are we okay here? Everybody loves when pastors talk about money, right? You're all coming back next week. Never mind. Moving on. 5, after I go through, and if you're here, by the way, and you think I'm after your money, look around you. About 50% of the church is under the age of 30. You don't have any money. I could embezzle money from Solid Rock, and I would have like enough to go buy a latte, right? Like, you don't have any money. We're doing, and don't get me wrong, we're doing great. You guys are generous, and we get, oh, by the way, I forgot, it's Sunday night. I'm sorry, I'm tired today. I forgot. We get, as a church, to embody what Paul is talking about, the idea of we're blessed, pass the blessing on. If you're new here, you may or may not know that 10% of every dollar you give goes right back out the door to a deal called Hear the Cry, which goes to like orphanage work, the poor, widows, sex trafficking, justice work around all in Portland and all around the world. On top of that, another 10% goes to a deal called Go, which supports gospel work, guys who travel around like Luis Plau, but more than anything, supports church planning close by and in the city in places like Eugene and all over the world, Europe, and we get to give 20% of Solid Rock's budget. Last year, I think, was $5 million, or a little over that. 20%, over $1 million last year, and this year, you guys are giving great, way higher, right back out the door. I think last year's giving to Hear the Cry was like over $700,000. How insane is that? That is insane. And that's not to brag, that's to celebrate your generosity, but what Jesus is doing here, and here we get as a church to embody that. Yeah, we're blessed. We live in Portland where the median income is way high, and even in a church with 50% college somethings, we have enough money to spare. By the grace of God, we don't own a building, rent is not that bad, and we are way understaffed, which is not good. Pray with us about that. But the nice part is we have money and no staff to pay. But that's a whole other problem we're working on right now. I know so many pastors who had to lay off 10 pastors, 10 staff, 20 staff, 30 staff in kind of the economic meltdown. Like, did you have to lay off any staff? No, but I would love to hire yours. We really need help. Anyway, whole other story to pray about. But we get to pass the blessing on. Now, back to the story. Look at 5. He goes on, after I go through Macedonia up in the north, I will come down to you, for I will be going through Macedonia. Perhaps I will stay with you for a while, even spend the winter. You can't travel in Paul's day. The seas are kind of dangerous. Roads are closed down. So that you can help me on my journey, which means support, give money, food, clothing, all that, for wherever I go. And notice that, by the way. I don't want to keep talking about money, but remember Paul's letter, his plan was never to break up 1 Corinthians into a year, 40-hour-long teachings broken. His plan was to read the letter in one sitting. Remember back to chapter 9, which is all about how Paul refused to take money. Early on in the story of Corinth, he refused to take a dime from the Corinthians in order to preach the gospel free of charge. And here he is 3 years later, and he says, pay up. Right? Support me on my journey, because he understands as you grow in followership to Jesus, you should grow in generosity, giving to the poor, giving to the mission of God, giving to kind of the local church and the people you work with, all of that. Support me on my journey, he says, wherever I go. 7, I do not want to see you now, make only a passing visit. I hope to spend some time with you, if the Lord permits. But I will stay on at Ephesus until Pentecost, which is a Jewish feast. It's kind of how Paul thinks about time, like in today's language, after the holidays, right? Paul says, all right, here's the plan, the itinerary. In kind of early summer, I'm going to head out from Ephesus over the Aegean, hit Macedonia up in the north, visit all the churches I planted, get money for the poor, come down to you by winter, and spend all winter long with you. But notice Paul's language. He also says, perhaps I will stay with you for a while. Wherever I go, I hope to spend some time, if the Lord permits. Notice the tension here. Paul plans, but he plans with an open fist, right? Here's the plan, here, now, winter, but he plans with a, if the Lord permits. Some of you are planners, am I right? I'm a planner. There's another name for that. It's called OCD, right? But anybody like me, I love my iCalendar. Nothing makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. Like when I open up my laptop and I look at my month, oh, wow, makes me feel good. I wake up every morning, I write out a to-do list for the morning. I write everything down. I mean, eat lunch, right? Because I love the feeling of, don't you love that, checking something off the list? I'm like an addict. I love that feeling. Lunch done, well done, okay, right? Like, I'm a planner all the way through. And if you're like me and you need medication and you're a planner, you need to hear, I need to hear, hey, listen, hold your plans with an open fist. Life is not always set in stone. Have your 5-year plan, but God kind of Hiroshima's 5-year plans, right? Like, open up your life. I mean, life is fluid and volatile and dynamic. Open up your life to God, to what God is up to every day, every moment, every year, every twist and turn, every kind of, wow, I was not expecting that. Jesus is like that. But others of you are not planners. You're like, if the Lord permits people. Right? Like you end every sentence with, if the Lord permits, right? You know, what's the saying? Life's a journey, enjoy the ride. Some of you enjoy the ride, but you're not going anywhere at all with your life, but in circles, right? With all due respect and welcome, and we love you and all that. But you know, well, I love that saying, if you aim at nothing, you will hit it every single time. But I know so many people, young people in particular, but all ages, who aim at nothing, or who aim at something and it's like, really? That's your life goal? A number at the end of a bank account? That's what's really, okay. 2 days on a weekend, a hobby? Okay, like, who aim at nothing or aim at things that don't matter. And you need to hear, like Paul, step back and look at your life at large from like 30,000 feet with strategy in your mind and think, what does God want me to accomplish with my life? What does God want me to accomplish with the next 10, 20 years? What does God want me to accomplish with the next year, with the fall, with late August, with tonight? Like, step back and think, what is God pushing me into? And make plans. Plans are not ungodly. The cross, the resurrection, was a plan before God made the world, Ephesians says. God is a planner, but he's also creative and spontaneous. He's both and. Plan. Think about your life. Think about what you're trying to accomplish with your short, precious commodity called time. And at the same time, open up to whatever God is up to in the world. Now, moving on. Paul goes on, I will stay on at Ephesus until Pentecost because a great door for effective work has opened to me, and there are many who oppose me. Notice here, tension again. Paul says, on one hand, great door, effective work, open doors for the gospel, open doors for relationships, open doors in the city. God is up to stuff all over the place. And at the same time, there are many who oppose me, end quote. Pushback, problems, issues, antagonists like, oh, wow, hardship. I'm tired, I'm beat out. And Paul, remember back in chapter 15, says, I fought wild beasts at Ephesus, end quote. My life is like the gladiators in the arena, right? Bloody and violent and hard. Open doors and pushback often go hand in hand. When God is at your back and he's pushing you forward, there are forces, human, demonic, worldly, that push back. But that is not a sign you are outside the will of God. That is a sign you are right where God wants you. That's one of the reasons it's really dangerous when people make decisions about life, about marriage, about jobs, based on whether or not they are happy. I mean, I've talked to multiple people who have gone through divorces based on the logic, I'm not happy, God wants me happy, therefore I'm done. If you live, what a shallow, contorted, upside down way to live. And if you think like that, it's not that God wants you unhappy, it's that God's after more than your passing emotions. How many of you are parents here? Yeah, you want your kids to be happy, right? You love your kids, But are you willing to make your kids unhappy for a while, for a time, in order for your kids to come out the other side? God is a father. He thinks like that. God's after more than your happiness. He's after who you really are, what you accomplish with your life, how your life echoes for years and years to come. He loves you too much to let you live for your happiness and nothing more. Happiness as a byproduct is a gift from God. Happiness as a goal is a waste of your life. He loves you too much. Open doors, push back. Where are you at? Maybe you're at a spot in your job, your marriage, your life, your ministry, your living situation. You feel pushback, you feel hardship, you want out, you want to go, you want to turn around, close the door. Stay in Ephesus. Stay right where you are at. Don't give up. Don't stop praying. Don't stop going. Don't stop seeking. In Paul's language, stay in Ephesus. Now, Paul moves on from all of that and he talks about leaders for a bit. Look at 10. When Timothy comes, see to it that he has nothing to fear while he is with you, for he is carrying on the work of the Lord just as I am, or in my place. Timothy was Paul's protege, kind of right-hand man, goes in Paul's place. No one then should treat him with contempt. Send him on his way in peace so that he may return to me. I am expecting him along with the brothers. Now, we don't know for sure, but I think, Timothy is the one who brings what today is called 1 Corinthians, or Paul's letter, to the Corinthians. Talk about a lame job, right? What's the TV show about the lame jobs or whatever? Dirty, I don't have cable, what? That's how godly I am, by the way. What is it called? Dirty jobs. Dirty jobs. Timothy is like that. That was a joke, by the way. Never mind. His job is horrific. Remember, think back to the last year. Is 1 Corinthians like a positive, feel-good letter? Right? No, Paul rebukes the Corinthians. Remember, you fool or stupid, right? He deals with problems, issues, sins. He exposes people, calls people out by name. Really heavy stuff. Can you imagine you're Timothy? Hey guys, I have a letter from Paul. Let's read, right? And you read through and you get done. Anybody have any questions? Right? And Paul says, okay, don't chew him up and spit him out. Send him on his way in peace. And then he goes on, 12. Now about our brother Apollos, I remember him from back in chapter 1. I strongly urged him to go with you to the brothers. He was quite unwilling to go now, but he will go when he has the opportunity. Now, random bits, pieces of info about leaders, but what Paul does here is really strategic. Remember back, I know it was a long time ago, but remember back to chapter 1. The macro problem in Corinth, or one of the macro problems, lots of problems in Corinth, one of the macro problems is that the church is divided into factions based on the personality trap. And some people are saying, I follow Paul. He's like the founding pastor. He's like father, he's pastor. Others are like, no, I follow Apollos. He's like the sophist. He's sharp and eloquent. I like how he teaches. Others are like, I follow Peter. I'm Jewish. We're in the minority here. Others are like, no, we follow Jesus. I'm like 20 and I don't listen to anybody. I do whatever I want, right? Did I say that? I'm sorry. But all sorts of different factions. And Paul here, look what Paul does. First, he sends Timothy to the church. Not Apollos, not Peter, not Paul. He sends Timothy, who's not the celebrity, right? Not the sophist, not the eloquent, everybody loves. Nobody follows Timothy, right? But Timothy's sharp, he's intelligent, he's hardworking, he's faithful, he's steady. He knows how Paul's mind thinks. He's like as good as Paul, but he's not stylish. Paul sends Timothy. And then he says, well, Apollos, the Corinthians are probably thinking that Paul is in Ephesus with Apollos, holding Apollos back because Paul wants to be Mr. Celebrity in Corinth. But remember, the problem is not with Paul and Apollos and Peter. The problem is not with the leaders. The problem here is with the church getting sucked into the personality trap. The leaders are all brothers and friends and all on the exact same team serving God's people, but the people are all about kind of the celebrity trap and the personality trap. And Paul says, no, I strongly urged Apollos to go. He was unwilling, not me. He feels called here right now. He's coming all in good time, but it's not me, and I'm open to anything. Notice how Paul refuses to give into the personality trap, And in place of that, Paul operates in a web of relationships, Timothy and Apollos and Peter, and he gets into more leaders, Stephanos and Aquila and Priscilla and dudes whose name I can't pronounce, and all kinds, and Sosthenes, you remember him? Paul is always in a web of relationships, and he's trying to say, listen, don't forget, it's not about one personality, or it is about one personality, and his name is Jesus. And we buy into that here, by the way, 110%. That's why we have a team of teachers. That's why I had the morning off and Jose was preaching, right? That's why we have a team of worship leaders. That's why we have a team of elders. That's why I am the lead pastor, but that does not mean I'm the CEO. I'm in a network of guys who are my brothers and my friends, all in the exact same team, who are my covering, who keep me in line, and at the same time support me and push me forward. And we all together serve you. Because it's not about one personality other than Jesus. And Paul gets that. And he says, listen, church, don't forget, remember that Sunday night. Next time there's a young guy up here, one of the values we have is taking young guys who are wet behind the ears and all of that and training them up in kingdom work. And God willing, over the next 10, 20 years, sending who knows how many guys out into the city and out into the world. You play a part in that. Every time somebody gets up here, and it's not, you get the same content as with me or one of the guys who's farther along, the same path, the same theology, but it's not whatever, and he feels awkward and he feels nervous. You are a part of something larger than one personality. You are a part of a move of God all around the world. Don't forget that, Paul says. Now, he shifts gears, and right out of the blue, in 13, he drops out 5 rapid-fire commands. The first are military metaphors. Look at 13. Be on your guard. I'm not a military man, but I get the picture, right? You're like, really? No, I'm not. Because I know you were all wondering, right? Duh. Be on your guard. Eyes open, stay alert. Don't put your feet up when life is good, life is easy. Don't put your feet up. Maybe you're here and your life is good right now. End of August, summer, you enjoy life. Well done. Be on your guard. Maybe you're here and your marriage right now is healthy. Great. Well done. Be on your guard. Maybe you're here and your purity is doing really well. You have stuff in your past, but right now you're pure and be on your guard. Don't put your feet up. Don't get into the hammock. Eyes open. Stay alert. At any moment, temptation could come at you. Sin could come at you. Pushback, evil, demonic powers at any moment, right around the corner. Paul says you're like a man in the military. Stay alert. Be on your guard. Then he says, stand firm in the faith. Stand firm. When doubt comes your way, when temptation comes your way, when sin comes your way, when opportunity for adultery or sin or this or that, the other comes your way, and you want to give up and throw in the towel and walk away from Jesus. No, don't. Don't act like a spineless idiot. No, stand up, firm in your faith. Plant your feet deep down in the ground. Arch your back, flex your muscles. Stand firm in the faith. I was having coffee with a guy a few weeks ago who's going through really, really hard, horrific doubts and doesn't know if he can hang on to faith in Jesus, and he was about to give up. And he said, you know what? I'm gonna stay. I'm not gonna give up. I'm gonna keep pressing on. When I don't feel anything, when God feels like a concrete wall, I'm not going to give up. What's he doing? He's standing firm in the faith, in Paul's language. Paul goes on and says, then be courageous, or be men of courage. Literally in the Greek, it's act like a man. Guys, a verse for you, all right? And sisters, I guess, in a kind of metaphoric way, right? But act like a man. And then he says, be strong. Not weak, not flimsy, right? When hardship comes, when doubt comes, when sin, temptation comes, when pain, when suffering comes, be strong. Act like a man. Don't give up. Don't act like stand up. Don't give in. But then, look at the last thing he says. Do everything in love. Huh? What is that doing there? Right? Stand, act like a man, be strong. Do everything in love. Are you bipolar? What? Did somebody put that in there? Where did that come from? Paul envisions men in particular, people, but men in particular, leaders in the church. He's all about leaders. He talks about leaders. He's about to talk. Men who are strong on one hand and loving on the other, and in the tension. Because most guys are going to end up, by nature, guys, you're going to be one or the other. You're going to be by nature strong and tough and masculine, and you push through and you work hard and responsible, all of that. And you can become, if you're not careful, harsh, unkind, thick in the negative sense of the word, mean, cruel, impatient. Others of you, guys, by nature are going to be loving, sweet, gracious, and you can become, if you're not careful, weak, spineless, pushovers. You don't lead your wife, you don't lead your family, you don't step up in your job, you don't take responsibilities on your shoulder, you don't work hard, you don't get up, you don't go for it in your life. Most of us are going to land on one side or the other. But think about Jesus. Was Jesus strong or loving? Yes. Jesus was strong. He was a tekton, or carpenter is kind of a lousy translation. It's more like a construction worker, right? There's no wood, by the way, up where Jesus lives in Nazareth. It's all like basalt rock, right? Everything's made out of rock. I mean, imagine Jesus with like muscles. He's not the skinny, wussy European dude in the paintings, right? He's a first century Jew with muscles, with a beard, right? He's strong. He knows what a hard day. Remember that line with Jesus, are there not 12 hours in a day? He works 12 hours a day out in the sun with rocks in his hand. Like he has the guts to walk into the temple with fire in his eyes and a whip in his hand and turn over tables. The guts to stand up against the empire of Rome as the king of the Jews. But at the same time, he's loving. He's gentle. There's a line that says he was moved with compassion. Children play in his lap. Broken, sick people are in his arms. He was strong and he was loving. Guys, we are followers of Jesus. Nobody here is perfect. I'm not, you're not. Some of you are tough. Well done. Others of you are nice. Well done. Jesus calls you and me to live strong, to act like a man, and to do everything in love. I pray that over you, fathers, husbands, guys, young, old. May we follow in the footsteps of Jesus. Now, he goes back into leaders. Look at 15. You know that the household of Stephanos were the first converts in Achaia, kind of part of Greece where Corinth sits, and they have devoted themselves to the service of the Lord's people. Stephanos is one of the leaders in the church. He's one of the first guys who comes to faith in Jesus. Remember, he's only like 3 years in to the Jesus story. And here, 3 years later, his entire household follows Jesus. Fathers, that's what we pray for. Husbands, that's what we pray for. That you, whether you have been following Jesus for 20, 30 years, or 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, that as you follow Jesus, guys, your entire house follows you into Jesus, into serving God's people. And here's what Paul says about people like Stephanos: houses, young, old, men, women who lead God's church, serve God's church. He says, I urge you, brothers and sisters, notice the family imagery, more on that later, to submit to such people and to everyone who joins in the work and labors at it. I know we all love the word submit, right? It's right up there with the word money. We love that idea, right? The word submit can be translated to voluntarily yield in love. Paul, notice, he does not get rid of authority in spite of kind of modern, flat, egalitarian takes on Jesus and the Bible. Paul instead, listen, please listen, he redefines authority around Jesus. And he says authority is not when you walk around with the title and you boss people around. Authority is when you live out your authority, and when you do so by serving people. And when you serve people like Jesus, like Paul, like Stephanos and his sons, his daughters, his family, you earn the right by serving, by humility, to lead God's people. And Paul says people who work hard, who serve you, and look at the language, labor. Like serving God's people, no matter how healthy your church may be, is hard work. I look at the guys I work with, the pastors who get a paycheck, but work 6 days a week, long hours to love on you and serve you. I think about the elders who are here, Dave Hughes in the back, guys who work late, long, hard, swing shift, and get off work and come here and serve you, help you here all day long, taking up weekends to love you, serve you, pray. I think of you house church leaders and how hard and difficult and beautiful that is. I think about you who are leading inside the church, outside the church, all around the city. It's hard work. And Paul says, listen, leaders who serve you in humility in a Jesus-shaped way, submit to people like that. And then he says in 17, I was glad when Stephanos, Fortunatos, and a dude arrived, because they have supplied what was lacking from you, for they refreshed my spirit and yours also. Such men deserve recognition. 3 guys come from Corinth all the way over to Ephesus, and here's what Paul says: they refreshed my spirit. Don't you love people like that? So many of you are like that. So many of you, like every time I bump into you, you refresh my spirit. Conversations, prayers, kind words, emails, notes. I mean, you are one of the most encouraging churches on the planet. I mean, you guys are incredible and a joy to get to work with. And so I love people who are like that, who are a breath of fresh air. You know, like on a hot day like today, where it's kind of humid and no wind in the air. You know that feeling when like a breeze picks up and comes at the back of your neck and your shoulders push back and you take a deep breath and a smile comes on your face? I want to be like that to people. Lots of you are like that. I want to walk into a room and it's like a breath of fresh air. I want to walk in and people say, wow, John Mark's here. Not, John Mark's here. Wow, okay, right? Which is more how it works most of the time. But I want to grow. I want to grow into, what if you and I were to walk around with that mindset on? Who can I refresh today? Can I refresh? And by the way, it's always hardest to refresh the people you are the closest to. It's easy to refresh people you don't really know. It's hard to refresh your husband or your wife or your children or your boss or your employees who don't do a very good job, or this or that, or your neighbor, people you... What if your mindset was, who can I refresh today? Paul says, they refreshed my spirit. Don't forget people like that. Now, he steps back from Corinth, almost done. He looks at the church at large. Look at 19. The churches in the province of Asia, modern day Turkey, send you greetings. Why does he put that in there? Because it's like, hey, remember, Corinthians, you're not the only church on the planet. Other churches, other places, other followers of Jesus all around the world. Don't forget that, Solid Rock. Yes, God is doing amazing stuff here. Yes, by the grace of God. But Jesus is doing amazing stuff all over the city, in all sorts of churches, all over the world in all sorts of churches. The Jesus movement spans oceans and continents and time. Jesus is alive and at work all over the place. Don't forget that. It's one of the reasons I'm really looking forward to 7, so I think September 21st for the 7 Wednesdays, like Ian said, because we are co-leading 7 with 6 other churches in town, more churches on board, and every night is going to be at a different church. We're hosting one night. All of the other churches, we're going to go to Door of Hope, we're going to go to Grace Chapel, we're going to go to River West, we're going to go to Colossae, we're going to go to Mars Hill, we're going to go all over the city and pray with other churches, other followers of Jesus, because we are all one church. Don't forget that. Next week, we're going to pray over Dave Lubin, who leads worship here. And with blessing and joy, we're going to send him a few miles away to a church in town called Colossae. We're in really good relationships, brand new church plant, really healthy Jesus leadership. I'm really good friends with the guys there. And we're going to send him over with joy to lead worship there every single weekend, not here. Why? Like, why send away one of your best worship leaders, one of your primary? Because we're all one church. Why are we sending, Jose and folks out to Hillsborough and Bethany and Cornwall? Why are we putting another church out there? Why? Because we're all one church. Paul says, don't forget that. He goes on, he says, Aquila and Priscilla. It's like, the couples who wear matching clothes? I don't see anybody tonight, but I would make fun of you, in which case. But it's not as bad as matching names, I'm not going to lie. Aquila and Priscilla greet you warmly in the Lord. Remember that in a minute. And so does the church